Okay, here we go. I've got the audio working. See, what happened was last night we had a Zoom meeting. Nothing important, but it had to go on Zoom, and I switched the audio over to the speakers, uh, the monitor speakers here in the studio, so people who were sitting here could hear the audio, and then I just spent 15 minutes trying to remember how to get the sound back in my cans, and I don't know why this went away. Oh, I know what, it didn't go away. I did have the sound going through there, so I just couldn't hear it. I just couldn't hear myself. So anyway, that's been averted. So welcome to On Film, on Video for January 21st, 2022. I don't know. I get a kick out of the 2022. I mean, it just seems like that's science fiction. That's, the movies I started out watching when I was, first susceptible to watching, fiction in a moving picture setting. That would be, in the future, 2022, and here we are. All right. Anyway, that's not that all. I'm This is the horse latitudes of the movie calendar year. There's really not a whole lot going on. We have a movie opening this week that was finished, that was put in the can in 2014. And they're dropping it in theaters this week just to see if anybody really wants to go to the movies and see this movie. I don't know how else to put it, but it's just like this movie has been around and they could never figure out a time to release it, right? So 8 years later, they, kind of like, get it out of here, clear this off, get this off the books. That's kind of what we're looking at with this. And this is the sort of year you did. There's another movie, Redeeming Love, which I don't know anything about, and I tried to find out stuff about it. I couldn't find out anything about it, so we don't have anything on it. But it's in the theaters if you want to see it. So there you go. This is traditionally the time of the year, and it's not really fair. It's traditionally time of the year when the worst movies of the year come out. Between now and, Valentine's Day, there's going to be some really bad movies probably coming to the theaters. And there's a use for really bad movies. Really bad movies, sometimes, you just want to go out and see something. And I think that I can say this. I think that even though we are still in this pandemic, I think one of the safer places to be if you're going to be out and, entertaining yourself. It's not in a bar. It's not in a crowded restaurant. It's not at a club. It might be in a movie theater where everybody is kind of, separated. I mean, I don't know about a Spider-Man screening or something like that, but it might be all right to go see a movie if you observe all the protocols and you're sitting, you're not on top of one another. And anyway, as far as I know, and as far as anybody knows, there's not been a reported outbreak of this virus that's related to a movie theater. Anyway, I'm saying that you're going to do what you're going to do anyway. I mean, sort of like I've gotten to the point where you can't really tell anybody about this virus. Everybody knows it all. Okay, so you're going to do what you're going to do, and that's fine. But anyway, there's uses for bad movies. Bad movies are fine. Sometimes bad movies are fun. Sometimes you might even rather go see a bad movie that doesn't have this draw on your attention than see a really good movie. I mean, I can think of date night situations. I can think of a certain scene in The Last Picture Show. I mean, it's, movies are commodities, and we're going to have all kinds of movies for all kinds of reasons. I don't mean to suggest that anybody is evil or a bad person for putting out a bad movie and then dropping it in the theaters in January and February, when if you're going to the movies, basically buyer beware. Caveat emptor, you should expect the movies in January and February to stink. But this leaves us with a kind of a problem if you're trying to fill out a movie section, a section in the newspaper that's devoted to movies. You need to have people who are writing about the movies, and hopefully not writing about the movies in this curmudgeonly way that suggests that everything sucks. So, what do you do? Well, what I did, and this week I sort of looked around and said, man, this is really depressing. So, we had a nice essay from Keith Garlington about award season. And it was funny because I had pulled a piece off the wire last week, off the wire services, by Ann Hornaday, who is a really fine critic, works for the Washington Post. And I pulled her piece off, and I had kind of planned to run it because, you're looking for stuff to run. And it's sort of on the same topic as the essay that Keith submitted. And I'm not going to say I like Keith's piece better, but Keith's piece addressed some things that I thought we could. I chose his piece over her piece. Okay, let's put it that way, which is a really lucky circumstance that he actually submitted it. And it's really nice that I feel like I've got contributors, writers here, who can, perform at that level. I mean, it's us or the Washington Post. Yeah, let's take us, because it's just as good. I mean, and like I said, I am a big fan of Ann's. I just happened to get Keith's piece, and it was really nice. We had a situation where, it actually came out. We could have run a review last week, the Tragedy of Macbeth, which opened on Apple TV on January 14th. But we had enough stuff last week. And I had a little problem because I never got my advanced screener, even though, thank you, Apple TV, for thinking of me, but you've got to follow through with the screeners. But I never got mine, so I didn't see it until it opened on the 14th. Or maybe, yeah, I don't know if I saw it the day before, that morning, or whatever. I did see it before, but I take it back. They did finally get me that. That's right. But it was a couple of days before it dropped. It was too late for me to review it for last week. We could have had a review for last week, but so we have Piers Marchant reviewing the film this week, but I wanted Dan Liebarger, who has some interest in the film and its history, to go back and talk about, Macbeth as a, as a property that's been filmed several times. So we've got that. That's something. Piers contributes to Sundance, piece. Sundance is coming up. He's not going. He's going virtually because Sundance is a virtual experience this year. And I think maybe Keith is going to participate in that too. So we may have two writers at Sundance virtually this year. That would be something, But he's prepared a preview of that. And I started thinking about, and you can read my column up there, and it will tell you all about this. But I was reading Paul Schrader, the filmmaker, guy who wrote Taxi Driver and directed First Reformed. He's a Facebook friend of mine, and I was following. He had a post about revising his top 10, his all-time top 10, and I'm not somebody who carries around an all-time top 10 in my pocket. Wait a second. I'm going to get a visual aid here. Hang on. I hope that was exciting video. Anyway, what Paul said, made a note. I guess it was probably around Christmas. It stuck with me. I had to go back and find it on Facebook feeds, so it took me a minute. What he said was he was retiring Citizen Kane from his all-time top 10 list. This is, of course, the granddaddy of greatest films of all time. You know, it's like if you don't have a greatest film of all time, this is one you could pick. This is, you know, critics love it. It is unassailably great. It is a very interesting movie, and it holds up. You know, you can watch this. You can show this to someone who's never seen it, and they will appreciate, enjoy it. Fine. It's off Paul's list in favor of Bernardo Bertolucci's The Conformist, which is also an awesome film that's often, you know, talked about as one of the better films of all time. It's not in the, you know, it's always in the top 50, always in the top 20, top 100. You know, it's rarely at the very top. And it wasn't at the very top of Paul's list either, which would have been Persona by Ingmar Bergman, which is another film that I think is really interesting. But what really got me thinking was just this little line that that he drops in there sort of casually. He says that, you know, because he was talking about, he put Martin Ritt's HUD on his list too. And he didn't give his old list, but he said it replaced both John Ford's The Searchers and Performance, the film with Mick Jagger. Yeah. So I don't know what his old list was exactly. I can sort of do, but what he said was, it just means more to me. You know, The Conformist just means more to him than Citizen Kane. HUD just means more to him. It's not really a comment on the value of the film, or the worth of the film, or the craftsmanship that goes into it, how well it's made, or anything like that. It is a personal experience. And one of the things we have talked about incessantly on this program is that film's subjective. No one ever sees the same film as anyone else because you're bringing your own set of stuff to it. You're contributing. You're collaborating with the filmmaker in the final product, because final product plays in here. This is where the screen is, okay? That's where it plays. And consequently, you never see the same thing twice because you've got a different set of stuff every time you see it. Now, that doesn't mean we can't talk about movies in a way where we discuss, you know, what we discussed, the plot, the performances, the actors, the mise en scène, all that stuff. Yeah, sure. But there's just silliness to sit there and take this hierarchical approach to it and say, this is better than this, and this is better than that, and this is better than this. And these are my top 10 movies, 1 through 10. And I'm not going to change that list until something comes along to knock something else off of it. Because I tell you right now, I change my mind about movies all the time. I'm sure you do too. Unless you've got your little list in your back. And there are people that have that. There are people that have their list. And sometimes I've even known people who carry their list around with them. And if someone asks for their top 10 movies, they can whip it out and they can just go, this is it. And they feel really good about that. I can't do that. I mean, I don't know from moment to moment what my best films are. I thought that I had talked about it a lot in print. You know, it was like one of those things that I said, I bet I was thinking, gee, it's kind of cheesy to do your all-time top 10 list. But, you know, it probably needs to be updated because I haven't done it in a while, is what I was thinking. And I went back and looked in our archives, the newspaper archives. I hadn't done it at all. I mean, I had sort of done it. In 1997, I went around to, I asked everybody, I think, in the features department, I asked them what their top 5 films were. And they gave me theirs, and I gave mine. In my list, which you can read up there, Hiroshima Mon Amour, which is a film that is really important to me because it sort of set me on a path to thinking about film in a different way. It's nonlinear. It's basically a conversation with images superimposed over it. It's a French New Wave film. It introduced me to that. It introduced me to Marguerite Duras, who was a writer I still care a lot about, but I really cared a lot about, 35 years ago. It was really important to me. It's just sort of, it just was a really important movie to me. And I didn't see it until the 80s, until I was out of college, actually. I'm pretty sure that I didn't see that until I was in law school. And I probably saw it at LSU because there was probably some sort of screening of it. And, but it changed a lot of the ways I think about film, okay? So it's a legitimate number one for me. It was my number one. My number two was Rules of the Game, Jean Renoir, 1939. It's an elegant movie. It's perfectly it just fits. It's just, everything fits together. It's just really good. Number three, Hold Standby. The Babe Ruth of motion pictures. Maybe not the very top of the list, but it's got to be in the top five. That sort of thing. And, I really do. I really do have a lot of affection for Citizen Kane. For many, many years, I watched this every year. We don't do things like that anymore because they're whatever. But, and I haven't had an occasion to screen it for an audience, which is really why I was watching it. That was number three. Number four was The Searchers. And again, I love that film. John Ford, John Wayne, the way it's shot, the shots through the doorways and windows and stuff like that. And number five, which is funny because it really doesn't resonate as much to me today as it must have in 1997, is Raging Bull by Martin Scorsese. Now, my favorite Scorsese films now Raging Bull would not be up there. I mean, it's still a movie I admire, still a movie I like a lot. But, my favorite Scorsese, I don't know. I mean, what did I say? Did I even say? I didn't list Scorsese when I started talking about my favorite, But there's a game I've got that is in my column above, but I'm going to actually see if we can't do something with this, where you put the director's name, you pick out maybe 20 to 50 directors, something like that, and you have, everybody picks their favorite two movies. And I think you could tell something more about someone's taste and about where they're coming from in their, their critical faculty. And if you did that rather than just ask them what their top 10 movies were. But anyway, so, it's like, okay, I changed my mind maybe about Raging Bull. I really liked it. And then in that same column in 1997, I said, I thought the Godfather, or Night of the Hunter, maybe Blade Runner, The Third Man, Carol Reed, Touch of Evil, Bonnie and Clyde, which is another film that's really important to me. Those ought to be, if I was going to round out a top 10. Okay, which I actually named 11 films in that column. Fine, I'll be fine with that. I didn't talk about this again until 2003, so it's like 6 years later. I'm addressing it again. I took a slightly different approach. I took sort of the way I just explained it. I looked at it the ways what movies had the most impact on me. It wasn't the same thing as my favorite movies. It's Hiroshima Mon Amour, of course. The Searchers, of course. I mean, The Searchers actually was another movie that I started learning about how movies are put together. Okay, and that helped. Platoon, which I've told this story many times about how it was the first film I actually really wrote about, and it was a film where I went to the screening and I was surprised because there were all these Vietnam veterans in there, and they were just busted by it. They were just it just snapped something in them, and they were crying. They couldn't talk about it. The power of that was something that's never left me. It's got to be one of the most impactful things I've ever seen. A few others, Taxi Driver, Bonnie and Clyde. Taxi Driver would be my favorite Scorsese film now. I mean, there's just no doubt. And Paul Schrader, if you're watching, kudos again. I mentioned, Star Wars because it was an important film for me. And Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless, Bout de Souffle, Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, which also still feels right. And then I, started talking about, the Matt Helm films that my dad used to make me go see. Dean Martin in this James Bond spy spoof. And the movies are terrible, Mainly they might be remembered more today because Sharon Tate had a role in one of them, and I think she was in the Wrecking Crew. And that's referenced in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the Quentin Tarantino film from a couple of years ago now. All right, so I didn't do that. Then in 2018, I took a different tack. I talked about the best movies of the 21st century, this century, not the future, which is what it sounds like. And I kind of decided that Mulholland Drive might have been the best 21st century film up to that point. There's a few others I mentioned. Spirited Away, Miyazaki, Coen Brothers, Inside Llewyn Davis, which I think is underrated. A lot of people think it's overrated. The Dardenne Brothers' L'Enfant, which I also think is a great movie. Todd Haynes' I'm Not There. And Jonathan Glazer's Under the Skin. In the Mood for Love, One Kar Wai. Though that may not be my favorite One Kar Wai film. It might be my second favorite. I don't know. And I actually think, if you're really bringing it up to date, that maybe Nomadland and Power of the Dog and Parasite and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood all ought to be like contenders for the best of this century so far. Aroma, Shoplifters, maybe. First Reform, maybe. But that's not going back to a personal heart, top 10. And finally, I was like, God, what movies mean the most to me? If you go that way, I kind of have a list. And maybe this will stick for a while. And you can read it up there, but I'll just go through it real quick. The Godfather, just because that's a movie that I'm amazed by. And it feels different every time I watch it. It never feels dumb. It never feels like a waste of time. But it's a really moving movie, and every time I watch it, I get a different sort of sense of it. I love that. Bonnie and Clyde, which I've told that story many times. I saw that as a little kid, or maybe I didn't. I thought I saw it, but it doesn't make sense that I would have seen it at that age in those circumstances. But, it stuck with me. Mike Leigh's Naked. Yeah, that's a big one for me. That's a real big one. Saw that I think it was New Year's Day, 1994 in New York City. With my wife. It was one of the first movies we actually saw together because we'd been married in November. We'd perceive I was seeing, but it's one of the first really big experiences, and I still think it's a wonderful, lacerating. Elvis Costello used to have a term. I guess he still has a term. Emotionally fascist movie. Okay, I think it kind of works. Under the Skin. Jonathan Frazier's movie with Scarlett Johansson. Do the Right Thing, I think, still is in my top 10. Taxi Driver. Jane Campion's The Piano. Though I am not sure that I don't like Power of the Dog a touch better. I'm going to watch The Piano again, I hope this month. I think Criterion Collection's coming out with an edition of it, and I would like to watch it again because that's another one. I can remember where I saw it. I saw it in San Diego at a little theater in the Hillcrest area of San Diego, so I can remember that. Miyazaki's Spirited Away is now in my top 10. The Last Picture Show is in my top 10, and part of the reason is because I have spent a lot of time on that the last couple of years. I really do that. And then I cheat a little bit. Krzysztof Kieslowski's Three Colors trilogy, blue, white, and red. So that's 12 films for my top 10. And the one I wish, and I don't mention this in the column, one I wish I had put in there, or at least mentioned, and I didn't, is Charles Burnett's Killer Sheep, which is a film that I'm very much attached to. I've taught that film. I've shown that film in public a few times. We've really gone frame by frame on that. But, you know, it's what's in your heart at the time and what's in your head at the time and what, you know. I don't know how anybody can keep all this straight. So there you go. It was a slow movie week, but I think we ended up with a pretty good section, and I hope you enjoy it. And we'll see you back here next week. Take care. Bye. It didn't